Okay, everybody, welcome back to Economic Problems in Public Policy. This is going to be our second content lecture. Just a few technical things. First, if you haven't seen it yet, I posted a lecture of me reviewing all of the midterm questions. So if you have questions on what you had to do to get full credit on the midterm, what's the curve going to look like, all of that's covered in that video. The other thing is be sure to ask any questions either in the comments down below on YouTube or in the discussion board on Blackboard. Remember, you need to have a comment or a post 3 times before the end of the semester in order to get your full participation credit. The third paper, remember the prompt for the third paper was covered in the last lecture, and that's going to be due the last Tuesday in April. Okay, so let's get into this week's topic, which is labor economics. I think labor economics is really interesting. It's what I'm kind of specializing in as a grad student. And it's interesting, I think, for 2 reasons. One is that it has a lot of very charged topics that fall under it. So things that we talk about all the time: unemployment, unions, immigration, education, discrimination, the minimum wage, stuff like that. Um, and the other thing that I don't talk about here is that labor economics is probably the subject where non-economists have the most preconceived notions. Okay, so when you talk to people about monopoly pricing, um, or what else have we covered? Pollution, right? They don't really have a lot of preconceived notions, but if you ask people, oh, what does the minimum wage do? Why is there unemployment, right? People have a lot of preconceived notions about how the labor market works that they don't necessarily have about how product markets work. All right, and maybe that's because most people have jobs, whereas not everyone is involved in producing products or services. Um, but I think for that reason, labor economics is really interesting because we can compare even more how most people's preconceived notions about how labor markets work and economists' notions of how labor markets work um, compare with one another. All right, so it's also really fruitful for you guys because right now you're deciding what you want to write your final paper on. Um, and the basic building blocks of labor econ can apply to a lot um, of applied topics for the end of the semester. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about kind of the basic ways that economists conceptualize and model labor markets, some applying topics that we covered in previous weeks to labor markets, and then we're going to touch on our first applied topic in labor econ, which is immigration. Next week we'll do education. Okay? All right, so let's get into it. So just like with any market, right? We typically think of the market for labor as being defined by labor supply and labor demand, right? If we draw out, this is a standard supply and demand for a product market, right? But we can relabel this. So in a product market, this would be price, right? But for labor markets, this is the wage, right? And in this is quantity sold, but here it's the quantity of labor sold, or it's employment, okay? And the other thing is that the people who are selling are the workers. This is your supply of labor. So this would be willingness to work. Okay, and this is going to be willingness to employ. I'll get that blackboard eventually. Okay, and and this is the market for, say, barbers. Okay, and intuitively, this can kind of make sense, right? why does the supply curve slope up? Well, the higher the wage, the more people are going to want to be barbers. Okay, that seems intuitively plausible, right? If Supercuts was suddenly paying people, $100,000 a year to be a barber, they'd probably have a lot more applications coming in the door. Similarly, quantity demanded or demand for barbers sloping down. If you could employ barbers at $1 an hour, right, there'd probably be a lot more barbers per barber shop, right? Or if you could get a butler for $1 a day, right, you'd probably hire a butler, or two butlers, even though you have zero butlers now. Okay, but let's look a little bit more into, what it means for these things to slope up and slope down and how this relates to labor markets. Okay, so labor demand. So we already talked about how the labor demand curve represents people's maximum willingness to pay for a worker's labor. Okay, and we also talked about how it slopes down. Okay, so the lower the wage, the more people employers are going to want to hire. Okay, intuitive, easy. The question is, what's going to determine where this labor demands curve sits in our wage employment space, in our price quantity space, right? Why is demand for one profession going to be higher for another profession? Why might labor demand go up or down? Okay, so think about that. What is going to determine people's maximum willingness to pay for a worker's labor? Okay, and let's just look at a quick example. This was released last week. Nurses in New York City are earning really high wages right now. Okay, $10,000 a week or $100,000 for 13 weeks. Okay, this is way higher than what nurses are earning normally. Okay, and the best explanation for this is that demand for nurses is higher in New York City right now. Why? Because nurses are more productive. Okay, that's the key thing here. All right, so if I'm able to bring in $15 worth of revenue for my boss every hour, the maximum he's willing to pay me is $15 an hour, right? It doesn't make sense to pay me 16 or 17 or anything higher, because anything higher than 15, he's just losing money on me, right? So the maximum wage that an employer is going to pay a given employee is that employee's marginal value product, okay? So already this can explain a lot of wage differentials, okay? Why are nurses in New York being paid more than nurses in Montana? It's probably because nurses in New York are a lot more productive right now, okay? The marginal nurse in Montana might not help that much. They don't have the huge number of coronavirus cases that New York does. The marginal nurse in New York is going to create a lot of value. Okay, similarly, why, why do fry cooks now make more money than fry cooks did in like the 1910s? Right? It's because the marginal fry cook is much more productive. We have all this cool technology that helps a fry cook way more burgers in an hour than they could in the 1910s. All right, you can think of tons of examples of this. And partially, hopefully we'll talk more about this next week, but one reason why you're maybe in college is you want to raise your marginal value product. You want to become a more productive worker, so that employers will pay you more to do jobs, okay? Remember, this is just the maximum wage that employers are willing to pay, okay? What's interesting, though, is that if there are enough employers, okay, we're going to expect them to get into a bidding war, okay? We remember that I Love Lucy clip from the Monopoly unit, right? We talked about how if there are multiple producers of a good, they're going to bid the price down until it's right at their minimum willingness to accept, which is marginal cost, okay? On the flip side, in the labor market, employers are going to bid wages up, okay? So let's say that, I can flip $15 worth of burgers in an hour, okay? And McDonald's hires me for $10 an hour, okay? That's now a profit opportunity for Wendy's to come in and offer me $12 an hour and get $3 worth of profit. And then McDonald's could maybe steal me back for 14, right? And then Five Guys could steal me for 14.50, right? And it goes up and up and up until wages are equal to your marginal product. Okay, so that's what we'd expect from a competitive labor market. All right, wages are bid until people are paid their marginal product. Okay, so when economists typically make this observation, right, that your wage is going to be pretty close or about equal, determined by your productivity, your marginal product. This is where people's preconceived notions kind of kick in. I hear this a lot, right? That low-paying jobs, right, like store clerks, subway drivers. This is a tweet that came out yesterday. I don't know why cops are on here, because they're not that poorly paid, right? Or janitors, right? Low-paying jobs often seem to be more important to society than high-paying jobs. Okay, right? So imagine a world without janitors. Imagine a world without CEOs, right? The world without janitors is probably a lot worse to live in. Okay, so is the marginal revenue product theory of wages just broken, right? Well, probably not, because remember, it's not just your productivity, it's your marginal productivity, okay? And it's also, remember, demand is only one side of the story, right? So let's get another color here. Okay, so let's say this is the demand for janitors. And this is the demand for investment bankers. Okay, actually, okay, that's fine. Okay, so it could very well be that a world with that the first janitor that the world has is worth more to society. Hang on, let me erase this so I can make this clearer. Okay, and here's investment bankers. Okay, so notice that the first janitor, the first janitor society has, is worth a lot more to society than the first investment banker. Okay, but let's say that there are a lot of people able to be janitors, right? It's not a job that requires a ton of qualifications and skills, and very few people able to be investment bankers. What you'd see is the wage for investment bankers is higher than the wage for janitors, even though the first janitor is more valuable to society than the first investment banker. The marginal investment banker is a lot more valuable to society than the marginal janitor. So this observation that people make all the time when you bring up the marginal product theory of wages is just kind of a labor version of what economists call the water diamond paradox. Okay, you might have talked about this in your principles class. Okay, and when we say that, oh, the price of something is determined by how much someone's willing to pay for it, the rejoinder is, why is water, which is essential for human life, so much cheaper than diamonds, which are worthless? Okay, and it's the same resolution. The marginal diamond is more valuable than the marginal glass of water, even though the first glass of water is way more valuable to you than the first diamond. Okay, same thing goes with jobs like janitor and investment banker. Okay, so to summarize so far, labor demand is determined by employees' marginal value product, how productive you are, and remember, marginal is super important. That can explain why careers that don't seem as essential as others are still very highly paid, because on the margin they're more valuable, even though their average product might be lower. Okay, let's talk about labor supply now. All right, what determines people's minimum willingness to accept? Okay, so remember, labor demand is willingness to pay, willingness to hire. Labor supply is your willingness to accept. What's your bottom dollar, right? How much does the boss have to offer you in order for you to do a job? Okay, and it's really the same things that determine all other supply curves. Okay, costs of production, which has some interesting applications to labor. The price of substitutes in production, right? What could you be doing instead of this job, right? That's your opportunity cost. Taxes, subsidies, expectations. All right, but let's focus on this one first because it has an interesting kind of application to labor economics. So let's look at two jobs. Okay, jobs that you may have considered doing. I see flyers for these all around campus. Okay, but these jobs are sperm donor and egg donor. Okay, and these jobs are roughly equally productive. Okay, so if you spend a year donating sperm, you can probably make, I don't know, 12 babies for couples who can't have children. If you're an egg donor, you can make about the same. I don't know what the exact ratios are. You can look it up, but they're comparable. All right, that's what's important, is that they're comparable in terms of productivity. Okay, but sperm donors make $100 per donation. Egg donors make $8,000 per donation. Okay, so the wage for egg donors is 80 times higher than the wage for sperm donors, even though, they're about equally productive. All right, so what gives here? What's the explanation? Okay, so think about this for a little bit. And the difference is that one job has much lower costs to the worker than the other, okay? Or another way of putting it is one job is a lot more fun than the other. Okay, so you can see this guy, he's pretty happy. She kind of looks dead inside. If you don't know, you can look up what these processes entail. But let's just say sperm donation is something many men do for free, and egg donation is a horror movie. It's awful. Okay? And what that means is that the supply of sperm donors right, let's say they have the demand curve sits in the same place for both sperm and egg donors. Okay, but the supply for sperm donors is way down here. The supply for egg donors is way up here. Okay, so the equilibrium wage for sperm donors is going to be a lot lower than the equilibrium wage for egg donors. Okay, and so this is an application of what labor economists call compensating differentials. Okay, we'd expect less fun jobs to have a lower labor supply and a higher wage, and more fun jobs to have a higher labor supply and a lower wage. Okay, ceteris paribus. Okay. So you can think of a lot of applications in this. So accounting, right? So you can, accountants get paid really well, and you don't actually need that much education to be an accountant. Part of the reason why it pays so much is because it is incredibly boring. Another example, garbage men. So garbage men typically make, $20, $25 an hour, and you can do it with a high school degree. Why? Because trash is really smelly. Okay, so this is the idea of compensating differentials in action. All right, and just like people have a kind of knee-jerk response to the marginal product theory of labor demand, they also have similar responses to the compensating differentials theory of labor supply. And that reaction goes something like this, is that garbage man's job is really not fun. He has to deal with smelly trash. And Tom Cruise's job is really fun, right? He gets to run from things and jump on couches, right? And act and have people wait on him hand and foot. But garbage man makes way less money than Tom Cruise, okay? Theory false. Take that, economics. You're done. All right, so what's going on here? So think about it for a second. So remember, our theory was that less enjoyable careers are paid more than more enjoyable careers, ceteris paribus. So think about it. Does this violate our theory of compensating differentials? Okay, and if you think about it, it doesn't. Why? Because the assumption of ceteris paribus is being violated. All right? It may well be that the supply of garbage men is lower than the supply of talented actors, right? But demand for garbage men is much lower than the demand for Tom Cruise. Okay, the marginal Tom Cruise can make your studio millions of dollars, while the marginal garbage man just takes out trash. Okay, so remember, with compensating differentials, you have to compare two careers of equal labor demand. Okay, so this is kind of an opposite version of what we talked about here, right? You'd have to compare two careers of equal labor supply. Here, you'd need to compare two careers of equal labor demand. Okay? So that's kind of the basics of labor supply and labor demand, and that's kind of what you should keep in mind when you're thinking about, why does this career earn so much more, so much less than this career? All right, I would say 95, maybe even 98% of those questions can be answered with just labor supply and labor demand. Okay, so think about, is this career more productive than, is the marginal person more productive in this career? And then are there compensating differentials? Okay, so that can answer a lot of questions as to why some occupations are higher paid than others. Okay, in terms of why wages change over time, there's one more thing to consider, and that's this idea of the price of substitutes in production being different. Okay, so barbers, right, are probably not that much more productive in 1910 and 2020. Okay, they can probably cut the same number of hair, they can probably perform the same number of haircuts in a week. I don't know if their quality has changed that much. Probably not, right? They haven't really gotten that much more productive, and the job really hasn't gotten any more or less fun than it has. Okay, so our two big theories of compensating differentials and marginal revenue product don't seem to, nothing seems to change much in terms of those things over the past 100 years. Okay, but when I looked up the salaries, the real wage of barbers in 1910 was about $20,000. And in 2020, it was $44,000. Okay, these are real wages, so adjusted for inflation. Okay, so barbers are making a lot more now than they were in 1920 or 1910. I don't remember what years these are from. I'll double check. Okay, but neither of our prevailing theories of wages, the marginal revenue product plus compensating differentials, seems to explain this. Okay, so what's our explanation? And this might be a hint. So remember, as the price of a substitute in production goes up, supply tends to go down, right? So if I'm growing corn on a field and I can also grow soybeans on that field, and the price of soybeans goes up, I might supply less corn and more soybeans at a given price. Okay, so how can this apply to our barber story? Okay. And the answer is that the opportunity costs are different. So in 1910, or 1920, whatever year it is, let's say 1910, this guy, if he wasn't a barber, right, he would probably be working in a factory or, doing whatever they did in 1910, manufacturing, maybe he would be in agriculture, making cars, whatever. All right. What would this guy be doing? Well, he might be working in a factory, but that factory would be paying him a lot more because, unlike barbers, factory workers have gotten a lot more productive over the past 100 years, right? We've created all of these new machines that can automate everything. You can produce way more cars in a given period of time. Agriculture's gotten way more productive because we have all these new pesticides, right? We have access to computers that make desk jobs really productive, right? So rather than having to, um, do all the change calculations in your head. If you're a cashier, now you can use the um, POS system, right? So there are all these reasons why, even though barbers aren't more productive, careers that are alternatives to barbering are more productive in 2020, okay? And because the price of the substitute has gone up, we have to pay him more in order to induce him to stay a barber rather than going off and joining one of these more lucrative careers. Okay, so that's the basic story of how, even though um, the productivity of barbers hasn't changed that much, the improved productivity of other careers has made it that you have to pay barbers more in order to induce them to take that career. Okay. Another example of this is the example of the string quartet. Okay, so it takes the same number of musicians, the same number of hours to produce one performance of, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata as it did 200 years ago. But for some reason, they make a lot more money. Why? Because the price of substitutes is higher. So you may have heard the term cost disease. Let's see. Different kind of C disease. Okay, and this is what we're talking about. How if productivity goes up in one industry, it can spread that increased cost of labor can spread like a disease to other industries. So if factory workers get more productive, barbers end up having to be paid higher wages. If information technology workers become more productive, string quartets have to be paid more too. Okay, so now you have another disease to worry about. In addition to the coronavirus, you can worry about cost disease. Okay, so let's move on to a topic that you may be hearing a lot about now, and that's unemployment. Okay, and the thing about unemployment, first off, let's define it, right? Because some people do get this wrong. A person is considered unemployed if they want to work, but they can't find a job. Okay, so in order to be counted as unemployed, you have to be looking for a job and unable to find one. Okay, so my daughter is not unemployed even though she's a freeloader who doesn't work and pay rent for this apartment. Okay, because she's not actively looking for a job. Okay, most people think that unemployment is just normal, right? And economists think that it's kind of weird. Okay, I say kind of weird because you might think some unemployment is normal, because there are always going to be people between jobs, right? So, if my wife and I move, right, because I get a job at a university somewhere, right, there's going to be a period of time where she's looking for a new job, right, but she'll eventually find one. Okay, so this is what we call frictional unemployment. Okay, this idea that people are just kind of going to be between jobs. Okay, and this is what kind of leads to the idea of the natural rate of unemployment. Okay, that some unemployment is probably good because there's always going to be people between jobs. Um, but the important thing is that month to month, it's not the same people. Okay, so if 3% of the population is unemployed at any given time, it doesn't mean that the same, you know, million people are, sitting around every single month unemployed. It's, a million people are between jobs this month and they find them the next month. It's a different million people, right? You can think of it as a bathtub that's draining properly, right? So if I turn on um, my bathtub and there's nothing wrong with the drain, right? There's still going to be maybe a tiny bit of standing water, right? But it's going to be draining properly, right? There's not going to be any problem with the drain. Okay. But what's weird to economists is this idea of persistent unemployment. Okay, that someone can be looking for a job for a long time and not be able to find one. All right, economists think that's just weird. Okay, that there would be more people who want to work than there are people willing to hire them for a long time. Okay, and why would economists think that weird? Think that's weird. So think about it for a little bit. And now I'll give you a hint. So unemployment so remember we'd got labor demand and labor supply. So something I've realized doing these videos is that I touch my face all the time when lecturing. I'm surprised you guys didn't tell me earlier, because it will probably lead to my demise. Okay, so labor demand, labor supply. And there are more people who want to work. Okay, so that's, more people who want to work than there are people who want to hire them. Okay, so there's a surplus of labor. Okay, and if there's a surplus of labor, what do economists think should kind of naturally happen? Okay, I drew it here. All right, and what should kind of naturally happen is employers say, okay, we've got, 50 applications for 40 jobs. Let's just lower the wage. Okay, so that we'll hire more people. We can hire more people at a lower wage, and then fewer people also apply. All right, so maybe if there are, 40 jobs and 50 applicants, 40 of those people say, oh, well, I'll work for, 10% less than the posted wages, right? That's a really easy way to clear a surplus, right? So if we have persistent unemployment, then for whatever reason, wages are stuck above the equilibrium level. Okay, and you can think about this in a recession. So remember, recession is defined as, that's ugly, a period of negative growth. Okay, so the economy is becoming less productive. And when you hear people getting less productive, you should be thinking lower labor demand. Let me open up Paint because it's better for graphs. The heck? Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so here's our story of unemployment. So we've got labor supply, and this is for all jobs. Okay, so that's going to be pretty inelastic. We'll talk about that later. Okay, and then labor demand. Okay, so here's our wage. Here's our quantity. Everything's peachy. Okay? And then we have a recession, and labor demand falls. Okay, so labor demand goes from this red line to this blue line. Okay, what should happen is that wages should fall. Keep that. Okay, wages should fall from this level here down to that level there. Okay, but let's say for some reason they don't. Okay, then instead of seeing wages fall during a recession, you'd instead see a bunch of people. Oops, how do I get my line back? Okay. You'd see, because remember, the wage is now stuck here because wages can't fall for whatever reason. Okay. We'd have this many people, Q1, who want to work. Oops. And this many people, Q2, who employers want to hire. And we have a surplus of labor. Okay, and so we're going to have unemployment until either wages do fall or labor demand shifts back to its original position. Okay, so because we see unemployment during recessions, I mean, we're in a recession now and we're seeing a lot of unemployment claims. The problem of unemployment is the same thing as the problem of wages being unable to fall. Wages are stuck above where they should be. Okay? So think for a little bit, why might this happen? Why when labor demand falls don't employers just cut wages? Or why don't employees offer to work for lower wages? Okay, why do they fire a bunch of people instead of just cutting wages? All right, and there are a couple of reasons why. So here's just an example of what might happen if an employer tried to cut wages. This is how people might react.
Greetings, wage donkeys. Is everyone happy and content?
Yeah!
This is great!
I would die for you!
Is your sense of outrage dulled?
Spill it, Super Boss!
Very well. Effective immediately, the employee prescription drug program is terminated.
What?
What?
These days of rising healthcare costs, blah, 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 lip service, lip service. Get out!
This must be the nasty surprise he mentioned in the invitation.
Okay, so here we have a cartoon villain of like the worst boss in the world, Mr. Burns, right? And only an evil cartoon boss could be so horrible as to cut workers' wages. And you can see that when he did cut nominal wages, or cut wages, right? His employees reacted with outrage, right? They try and, get him. Okay, so for whatever reason, employees really don't like it when you cut their wages. Okay, they are angry at you. They might not work as hard, right? There's a lot of resentment, right? So rather than deal with that decrease in morale, bosses might decide to just fire people and keep wages the way they are. Okay, because fired people, they're out the door. They can't drag down your morale. Okay, but the result of this behavior is unemployment. Okay, so there are costs to lowering wages. All right, and this is why we sometimes say that wages are sticky. Okay, maybe you've heard that word before, sticky wages. Okay, they're not falling when they need to. Okay, why do we have sticky wages? Part of it can be government policies. Okay, so minimum wages or support for labor unions can prevent wages from falling. All right, but an economist named Truman Bewley, he interviewed a ton of employers, and he asked them, why don't you cut wages during a recession? And he creatively titled his book, Why Don't Wages Fall During a Recession? And the overwhelming answer they gave was that it was their workers' psychology, that nominal wage cuts hurt workers' morale. Okay? I keep saying nominal wage cuts, right? Because remember, you've got your nominal wage, which is the actual number on your paycheck, right? And then there's your real wage, the amount of goods and services that wage can buy. Okay, and when I talk about workers don't like it when their wages are cut, that almost always means they don't like it when their nominal wage is cut. Okay, they don't seem to mind as much if there's inflation and the purchasing power of their wage goes down. This is sometimes what economists call the money illusion. Okay, we care more about the nominal wage than the real wage. Okay, so that's why I've been saying nominal wage cuts. But that might give you a hint as to what can the government do about unemployment. Okay, so problem of unemployment is wages being too high. Part of that is because wages are sticky, maybe because of the money illusion. So think about it. What could the government do to maybe help with this problem? What are some policies that you could recommend? Okay, so I guess there, we'll talk about the money illusion there. Okay, one easy thing the government could do, right, is they could mandate wage cuts. Okay, they could say, you know, there's a recession, you say all wages are now cut by 10% by order of law. Okay, not only is that ridiculously unpopular, right? So during the Great Depression, one of the reasons why the Great Depression was so bad is because Herbert Hoover made employers promise not to cut wages. All right, he thought that recessions were caused by low wages. He was wrong. But that's one reason why the Depression was so bad, is because the government tried really, really hard to make sure that wages weren't cut. Okay, so they could do the opposite. They could mandate wage cuts. That has all the problems that we talked about with price controls, right? Is like, how far do you cut them? How, like, when do you allow them to rise? Stuff like that. Okay, so the better thing that people have talked about is, remember the money illusion. Workers are really upset when you cut their nominal wage, but not their real wage. Okay, but remember, in our supply and demand graph, this is always going to be the real wage, not the nominal wage. Okay, so maybe what the government could do is you say, okay, employers, you're unable to cut nominal wages. We get it. Okay, what we're going to do, because we have control over the money supply, is we're going to cut real wages. Okay, how are we going to do that? By printing money. Okay, so one reason why economists think that a little bit of inflation every year is a good thing is because it kind of helps with this problem of wages being stuck too high. Okay, it is kind of stealthily cutting real wages in order to make sure that there's not too much unemployment. Okay, let's see, how long have we been going? 40 minutes. All right, so let's take a break, and then I will see you in part 2. We're going to talk about monopoly, monopsony, which is a new term, and